It's the Beth Cahill Show. And now, here's Beth.
Good morning and welcome to the Beth Cahill Show. I thought it would be a good time to talk about the American family and how it has changed over the years. There's no such thing really anymore as the typical family, the typical American family, and that has not always been the case. 50 years ago, 73% of children lived in a household with two parents who were both on their first marriage. Today, families come in many different forms, and it's actually now less than half of children are living with both of their parents, 46% actually to be exact. So there's many reasons for the changing in the American family, but I've been thinking about this for a while and I wanted to figure out why, what was driving all of this. So some key factors that have contributed to the decline in the family unit is something that we're going to go through today. So first, I want to give you a picture of the decline and just how drastic it has been in the last 50 years. So I'm going to run through some numbers first. So for starters, people are waiting longer to get married now than they did in 1950. Men even longer than women. Families are smaller now than they've ever been, and that is due to the growth in a single-parent household, but also there's been a drop in fertility as well. So young adults are living with their parents longer than they did several decades ago. You hear about that all the time, right? Millennials, they're living in their basements. There is some truth to that. There are now more adults, 18 to 34, living at home than in any other time period. Young adults' living arrangements have changed. In the 1960s, you had 40% of young adults were living with a spouse. Today, there's 8% of young adults living with a spouse. The number of 18 to 24-year-old adults living with an unmarried partner, which is obviously commonly known as cohabitating, is 15 times higher today than it was in the 70s. Cohabitating is, really widespread now, actually. So widespread, though, that women now have a 75% chance by the age of 30 of living with their partner before marriage. Women are waiting longer to have children. In 1960, close to 95% of all babies were born into homes with married parents. You fast forward to today, you got 40% of all babies born are born into a household to a single mom or a mom living with a boyfriend. Studies have suggested that about 39% of children will have had a mother in a cohabitating relationship by the time they turn 12. And by the time they turn 16, that would jump to almost half. Having children out of wedlock is becoming increasingly popular. The amount of moms having babies out of wedlock has risen 720% since 1960. Less than half of children growing up in the United States know what it is like to grow up with both a mom and a dad. So the decline in the family unit, it's a topic that really gets covered breathlessly in our news, right? You hear about it all the time. You hear about it in blogs. You hear about it on social media. But what you never hear is why. Why has there been such a decline in, the traditional family unit? Or, what are the contributing factors to this? So I took it upon myself to find out. And what I found out was there are all types of theories about what's driving this. But I kept coming back personally to really 4 areas that were affecting these numbers the most. So for starters, you have millennials. Millennials are not getting married at the rate that women used to get married several decades ago. And, millennials are actually changing the game in a lot of areas of, modern life, but they're especially changing it when it comes to marriage. The second contributing factor was the feminist movement. The feminist movement has played a vital role in the decline in the family unit. Number 3, I believe the decline that we've seen over the last 5 years is men and the decline that we're seeing in men in the traditional family unit. And lastly, religion. Religion is playing a big part in this as well. So let's get to it. Let's go through these and let's start with millennials. Millennials today, there is an unprecedented number of them remaining unmarried through the age of 40. That is not to say by any means that the decline in marriage wasn't happening already, because it definitely was. We've seen this trend for years and years and years that marriage was in a decline. It's not millennials' fault, but millennials are playing a big part in this. Millennials, in particular, marriage is plunging. Pew Research came out with a study that was interesting. They say that 25% of millennials are actually never even going to get married. That's the highest share in modern history. So not only are they waiting to get married until they're almost 40, you've then got 25% of them that will choose to never get married at all. We're living in a time, though, that, I mean, it's not shocking. We're living in a time that no longer people tell you that you have to get married, right? In fact, society now tells us that it's okay to not be married. It's okay to just cohabitate. In a sense, traditional marriage over the years has lost its intrigue. It's no longer, the most attractive option. And especially that's true for millennials. So to give you just a kind of a quick example, when I was preparing for the show, I wanted to read articles on how people were viewing marriage these days, right? How younger people viewed it versus older people, men, women, et cetera. So the first thing I Googled was traditional marriage in decline. And I want to read a few titles that were interesting. And this is what popped up first when you go just to do basic research on this. The first title was Why Men Are Unmarriageable. Unmarriageable is, yes, apparently a word. So why men are unmarriageable. Number 2, the meaning of marriage is so deeply rooted in the patriarchy. That was the second title. Number 3, is an open marriage happier? And number 4, traditional marriage would truly shock our ancestors. So this is what I mean when I say the society over the years, it's shifted. The way that we view marriage and the way that we view a family unit, it has shifted from, promoting a family unit or traditional marriage. And when I say traditional marriage, I just mean 2 parents in the home, to men are now unmarriageable. Patriarchies are bad. Open marriage is good. I mean, you get the idea. And the problem with all of this is that it's not that we as individuals should not have the right to choose whether marriage is good for us individually or having a family unit is good. The problem sets in when these options aren't just not glorified anymore. They're downright campaigning against them. And in doing so, they're not showing what not having 2 parents in a household is doing to children. So it's no wonder that millennials are having second thoughts about marriage. Society is telling them at every turn the case against marriage. The second piece, again, what I believe to be contributing to, the breakdown in the family unit is modern day feminism. I'll be honest, I used to be a part of this movement, but I believe that the direction that it has gone, I just can't relate anymore. And I actually know this to be true for so many women. Like so many things that have changed, the feminist movement is no different. I tell people all the time that it's been hijacked. Feminism used to be a movement that was about equal rights for women. It was about equal opportunities for women. And to continue to try to push those agendas forward. But modern day feminism has left me, and it's left me with the feeling that it's not all that pro-women like it used to be. I mean, modern day feminism is not pro-women at all. You can't be pro-women if what you're really saying is we are pro-women to only the women who believe what we believe. Modern day feminism has taken a sledgehammer to the patriarchy. They believe that by doing this, they are solving the male dominance problem that exists in their minds. And if you do not believe this, or if you don't fall in line as a woman into this way of thinking, you will be labeled every name in the book, including a traitor to your gender. People always ask me why I say it's been hijacked. And the example that I always give was that women were fighting for the opportunity to have a seat at the table. But now it's as if the opportunity isn't good enough. Now we're going to force that seat, regardless of whether our performance earns us that seat. It's this idea that women are victims. And I can't get on board with a movement that tells me that I'm a victim. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by this. California has just become the first state to require publicly traded companies to have a woman serving on their board of directors. They're requiring it. Please, someone explain to me how forcing companies to give us a seat at the table helps further the message that we're not victims and that we can do that on our own. I would love for someone to explain that to me. Okay, I was going on a rant with that one, so let me get focused. But in all seriousness, the reason that I'm choosing to include modern day feminism as a contributing factor to the decline in the family unit was for the ugly turn that this movement took when it stopped focusing on promoting all women and lifting all women up to now only lifting up the women who believe like them, like they do. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, they took it a step further. Now they bring men into the mix. And this idea that in today's feminist movement, men are no longer allowed to be men. Their inherent instincts to protect and provide for their families are no longer something they get to do without being labeled, toxic masculinity or male dominance. I mean, you hear that all the time. This movement tells men to take a seat. It tells men to ignore their instincts and that their instincts are bad. I was on Twitter actually this morning, and there was this girl that tweeted, and for starters, if you want to stay sane, stay off Twitter. But nonetheless, I was on it, and this girl had tweeted out that a man had held her door open for her while going into a grocery store. And she was so proud of herself. She told him that she would open the door herself, and, how sexist of him to think that she couldn't, or to stand there and hold the door open for her. I mean, come on. Obviously, that's extreme, but you actually do hear about these type of incidents all the time. This belief from young women hating men somehow makes you a great feminist is just not something I can get on board with. The last I'll say on this, and again, how it's contributing, is that this is part of why women are waiting to get married, or maybe never getting married at all, which ultimately leads to the decline in the traditional family or the family unit. Modern day feminism tells us that gender roles are bad. This movement tells us that loyalty and devotion and purity aren't good things for women to be to their partner. It's a sort of weakness. So for women that believe that for their life, gender roles actually work and traditional values are something that they would like to preserve and pass down to their children, this will automatically make you a target for modern day feminists, because this goes against what this movement is all about. These qualities of religion and devotion to your husband and God forbid wanting to stay at home and let your husband provide financially while you stay home to raise your children. These qualities are revered as almost nauseating to modern day feminists. So it's really easy to see how this movement might possibly have an effect on women and their feelings about men and their feelings about marriage. So if you are just tuning in, you are listening to The Beth Cahill Show, and we are discussing the decline in the family unit in America and what I have believed to be some of the key contributing factors to this, which leads us to my third point on why the family unit is in decline. And that brings us to something that we have discussed on this show, and that is the boy crisis. As I have said previously, boys are falling behind in this country, and it's having a major effect on everything, including the family unit. We have been living in a very future is female type environment. And again, yes, the future is female. But we must not stop there. The future has to be everyone. The decline for men has been happening steadily for decades now. Men are the minority in college. Men are now less likely to attend college than women. Men are less likely to graduate college than women. Women outnumber men 59 to 41% in graduate school. This is the first year in American history that the workforce has become majority female. Women dominate our colleges. Of the top 15 industries that are projected to grow in the next 10 years, 13 of the 15 are occupied primarily by women. In 1950, 1 out of every 20 men weren't working. Today, 1 in 5 aren't working. Boys have fallen behind girls academically as early as elementary school. Females earn 57% of all college degrees. Boys are far more likely to fail, be suspended, or drop out of school. 93% of prison inmates are male. Men are twice as likely to die from an overdose. 20% of men are unemployed. This is what happens when for decades, all of your resources go into young girls and women. For decades, we've been hearing the idea that men are bad, men are the problem, they are to blame for all things. How could we have possibly thought that if, as a society, men are constantly being devalued and shamed, that this wouldn't lead to a situation where we've now shamed them enough just for being men that they no longer contribute to society in a way that they once did. Or now it's getting to the point where there's a major gap in homes with men in homes with wives and their children. I mean, honestly, what did we think would happen? If society continues down this path of decades-old failures for men and no growth in sight, we are going to end up with men who resent women, a feminist movement that already resents men, and in turn furthering this divide in family. I am for human rights, not just women's rights. I have benefited greatly from the feminist movement that included bringing women into the workforce and equal opportunity. I have a wonderful career. I am a business owner. I am a working mom. The achievements that we have seen in women are astounding, and they should be celebrated for just that. But we cannot be blind to what has taken place with men in the last 50 years. The alarming rate in the decline of our boys, it's not something to celebrate. There are many people out there that think that if we encourage these failures that we've seen in men, that women will continue to gain, or think that any support that we give men will take away from the progress that we've seen in women. And what I say is no way. What I say is we actually now have the blueprint for what happens when you choose to pour into certain groups of people, in this case, women. What great things can happen. When we talk about the decline in the family unit, it's interesting because when millennials were asked why they were choosing to not get married or why they were getting married so late in life, their answer was, number one, their disengagement to the institution of marriage. But another common answer is that they can't find a suitable partner. Well, that's what happens when 60 years we've sat by and watched men drop in every major category and done nothing about it, done nothing to address it. We've seen 40 to 60 years of boys falling behind. It's created a cycle that's been devastating to everyone, male and female, as you can see. It's affected the family unit. It's simple. If boys aren't going to school or are dropping out of school, then they're not getting high-paying jobs, they're not getting married, and therefore they're not in the homes to help raise children. Well, what do we know about men that aren't in homes to raise children? What we know is study after study shows that fatherless homes is one of the biggest things that contribute to more fatherless homes, which studies have shown has a negative impact on kids. We know that boys in particular that grow up without a father are more likely to do poorly in school and go to prison. We know that neighborhoods where marriage is scarce, fathers are scarce. And when fathers are scarce, more than half of boys will drop out of high school. We know that if a young boy doesn't have an education, the less likely he'll be employed. We know that if he's not employed, again, the odds are pretty great that he's not going to get a suitable partner to marry him. We know that if he's now labeled unmarriageable, as I just found out was a word, that's also key for not good father material. And the hard part about this is talking about this issue has become incredibly taboo. It's frowned upon. No one wants to have this conversation. The response is always, it's the girl's turn. Or boys are fine, men are fine. Does it sound like men are fine? Or boys are doing well? Does it sound like the last 50 years has gone well for them? It's a vicious cycle, folks. Men and women alike are on the losing end of this. And as you can see, when one is failing, it has dramatic effects on far more things than we would like to admit. It's affecting women and children alike when we are not lifting men and boys up. The last point I want to make in regards to the contributing factors in the decline of the family unit is the area of religion. Studies have found that more religious parents had more cohesive family relationships. According to this research, parents that were religious were less likely to have issues in their marriages, and the children in these families were better in regards to the actions in their day-to-day life. Children were also better at regulating their emotions and their actions. So what we know is that religion can also have adverse effects, right? There's been studies to show the opposite of this. You're always going to be able to find, a study that encourages what you believe, or a study that, you'll always find those. But so yeah, you're going to have the studies that are going to show you when there is extreme religion in homes, Or you may have a child or even a spouse that doesn't want to conform to those standards of religion, that it can pose problems for your family. It can cause problems with your children. It can cause problems in your marriage. We know that. But by and large, studies have found that religion teaches strong commitment, discipline, and loyalty to something bigger than ourselves. And that all of those things are positive to a family unit. So why is it, if studies show that religion, if used properly, is a great tool to help aid in the strong family unit, that it's still been on the decline in American families? This is actually a rare area where Democrats and Republicans agree. Majorities in both parties say that religion is losing influence in American life. Studies have also shown that people that identify as a religious person in some way or another are less likely to want to cohabitate, and they are more likely to want to get married and have children. So the decline in religion is part of the bigger picture in why more millennials especially are choosing to cohabitate with their partners rather than get married. Because that's exactly what the studies are showing. So as you go into Thanksgiving week and spend time with your families, look around, see if what I am onto is what you're also seeing. I think great strides have been made in a lot of areas in the way that we look at family and the family unit versus 50 years ago. 50 years ago, if you didn't fit the mold, it left kids feeling, and even adults feeling like they didn't belong or there wasn't a group that they belonged to. People are now much more accepting to how this, the family unit has evolved over time. The stigmas with divorce and blended families are almost gone. And hopefully soon they will be completely gone. And people, they are free to marry who they choose. These are the good things. Dropping stigmas and judgment has especially been good for children who are growing up in these blended families more and more and more, as we can see and as we've talked about. But I also think that it is important to understand why the family unit has changed, why it has changed so much. And hopefully I have shed light on that, because I am now almost out of time. But next week, I'm going to get back into politics. I have updates for you on what's happening here locally. And of course, the saga that is Washington, D.C. We'll get you caught up there as well. I'll be back next week, same time as always.
This has been the Beth Cahill Show. If you have any feedback for Beth or would like to suggest a future topic or guest for the show, email beth@thebethcahillshow.com. That's Beth at @thebethcahill, spelled Cahill show.com. Tune in again next Saturday morning at 9 for more of the Beth Cahill Show, right here on AM 1590. The Answer.